Hello everyone, this is Jacob Hopio, the producer of The Apex. In this episode, Jan and I sit down to talk about Jan's most recent trip to Slovakia, his first time returning in over 10 years. Jan's mother is a first-generation immigrant from Slovakia, and his father is a second-generation citizen in the United States, giving Jan and his sister Zuki an opportunity to become dual citizens. Additionally, I relay my own experiences studying abroad in Rome and living in Shrewsbury, England, where my dad worked while I was in high school. Together, we both explored our experiences overseas, and it gave us an insight of variations and similarities between American culture and European culture. If you want to support us, there are two ways to do so. One is to donate to our cause at www.patreon.com/theapexpodcast. The other is completely free. All we ask is if you learn something from this episode or know someone that needs to hear our message, share it with them. Please subscribe and hope this pushes you toward your apex.
Ahojte všetci, vitajte v ďalšej epizóde Apex Podcast. Ja som Jan Almasi a so mnou je môj kamarát Jacob Popio. Dneska budeme rozprávať moje dovolenku do Slovensko a potom budeme rozprávať trošku, keď Jacob Popio zabýval v UK. Ďakujem pekne, že všetci sú tu a teraz ideme.
Whatever he said, I don't know.
All right, so welcome everybody to another episode of the Apex Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jan Almasi, and seated across the table from me is our wonderful producer, Mr. Jacob Popio.
How goes it?
Today, we're going to talk about my trip to Slovakia, some cultural differences, some things that we like about being overseas, because a little-known fact, Jacob Popio lived in England for a substantial period of his childhood for months at a time.
Well, not my childhood. I was in high school, but...
Well, I consider high school childhood still. I'm 24 years old. I still consider myself in my childhood.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, I still feel like a kid compared to, like, other adults, but...
Well, I remember looking at 25 and being like, that's so old. And now I'm like, that's next year.
Quarter life crisis.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine how RJ feels at 26. Ooh. I'm just playing. Anyway, so if you guys are wondering what language that was, it was Slovak. I just got back from a trip to Slovakia. I visited my family there. I hadn't seen them in about a decade, but it was an awesome trip. I spent 11 days with my grandparents, my cousins, kind of gallivanting around my homeland, Slovakia. My mother immigrated to the United States in 94, 93, one of the two. Her and my dad have been married now 25 years, but all of her family still lives in Europe. So we try to go back as often as we can. This is the first time that I had the chance to go back in about a decade. So the Slovak is very fresh in my mind. Very excited that I'm still conversationally bilingual. You know, not anything too crazy. But I could definitely get by. So,
can you read the writing and everything?
Mm-hmm.
You know what it means?
I can't write for crap, but I can read it relatively well. Because they have different characters that go above the letters, kind of like in Spanish and stuff like that.
Tildes and the accent marks.
But we have accent marks in something called a mekchain, which basically takes a C from a ts to a ch, or an S from a s to a sh. So you just got to it just depends on the sentence structure. And their grammar structure is really weird, too.
Is their alphabet different?
No, not really. It's just the sounds are all different.
Because
it's not really different until you get, like, Ukrainian or Russian.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like,
yeah.
Russian, it's like a different alphabet.
Russian's like trying to read statistical data as you're
it's
writing
like code.
Book. Yeah, it's cryptic. But anyway, so today, me and Jacob were talking before the... turned on the mics, and we basically kind of want to cover, because me and him have been to Europe. I mean, that's where we met. I mean, not where we met, but where we became really good friends was on our trip to Europe, to Rome. Yeah. So, I mean, I've been overseas well over a dozen times at this point.
Yeah.
And then we've both spent a pretty substantial amount of time in the European arena. Not by any means experts, but what you just exposure to the different side of life.
They're just novelists, I guess.
Novelists.
Yeah.
So this will be a little bit of an intro into just that global perspective, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The apex around the world, as it were.
Yeah, just our perceptions through our own lens.
Right. So I'll give you a little bit of background on my family over there, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the points that I've written down here. So my grandfather is 81 years old. I was just telling Jake, he still cuts high grass and corn with a scythe. Does all of his garden work by hand, still walks the dog. I mean, he's just an animal. And then my babka is 78 years old, I believe, 78. She started to get a little bit slower, but probably the best cook that I've ever encountered.
Really?
Sorry, Mom.
Well, what does she make?
Oh, kolbasi, pierogis, halushki, kolachik.
Kolache is a nut roll?
Like a nut roll, or just any type of cake or cookie, really.
So that's
it's just a
generic
term. Mm-hmm. And then polievka is soup. So, I mean, all different types of soup.
Well, what's the most common?
A lot of times it's like goulashy, like really thick stews. More meat and noodles than there is liquid.
So noodles, not potatoes.
Well, the potato, they're like dumpling noodles, ish. So they could be made with potatoes or they can be flour based. Mm-hmm. So good. A lot of cabbage.
Is it tomato based?
Tomato? No.
Stock or no?
Most of it's beef broth or bone broth.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Super good. I mean, I've got my mouth watering. Think about food. But so they live in literally like population 100 village. Tiny. I mean, you can walk to church. You can walk to the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
You can take the bus. It's like 15 minutes outside of the major city, but the major city is probably about the size of Canton. You know what I mean? It's the second largest city in the country, and it's probably a little bit bigger than Canton. Slovakia itself is about the size of West Virginia.
So not very big.
No, it's the entire country is the size of West Virginia. So the U.S. in perspective is massive. But they grew up, during Soviet occupation, during all that other kind of stuff. So I was talking to my grandpa. He vividly remembers not having money as a kid. Like, money wasn't a thing.
Really?
It was a barter system. So, like, you had your farm. If you wanted a pair of shoes, you made yourself a pair of shoes. Or you traded food to a neighbor that knew how to make shoes.
Whoa.
And then you would get shoes. And, like, everything that your family was worth or owned was based on what you could raise, what you harvested, stuff like that. He built his entire house.
That's real life Catan right there.
Yeah. So I guess him and my grandmother and his friends built the house that they currently live in together 42 years ago now.
They did it all by hand? Or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they built it all from ground up.
And I assume they didn't have,
crazy construction tools and everything. No. Scaffolding, basically.
Like no nail guns or anything?
Mm-mm.
It's all done by...
Crazy. Yeah. Now, this is the kind of stuff that we were talking about when I was over there.
Amish.
So, yeah, that's the kind of lifestyle that they grew up with coming from, right? My grandfather is amazed at the fact that you can go to the store and buy a pair of shoes. Or, like, money really isn't an object because it's just like, it's just money.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where I get my little bit of not so frugal side of life, where I'm, like, anal about certain things. Like, I know I need to pay my bills, but then after that, it's like, I have no issue paying for somebody's drinks or paying for dinner. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that big of a deal for me. And none of the people in my friend group really are like that. So the first point, now that you guys kind of have an understanding, where that is, it's a little town called Zdoba. It's outside of Košice if you want to look it up online. But
how do you spell that?
Kosice, Košice. And then Zdoba is Zodba.
Yeah, I would have known how to spell that.
Yeah, Zdoba.
Yeah.
Zdoba and Košice. But the first point that I want to bring up is my grandfather has had the exact same car for like 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's a little Toyota Corolla with a dent in the back left-hand side that he will never forgive whoever did that for, because this car is like mint for being
Really?
25 years old. Yeah. It has like 200,000 kilometers on it. So in 25 years, he's only put 100-something thousand miles on it. And I think that that's just an attestation to what,
Mm-hmm.
how small that town is, you know what I mean, and how close everything is. And it's not really that, you don't have to drive that far.
That really
into the city.
shows the different mindset that Europeans have compared to Americans. We're like
Right.
the throwaway culture. We want something new, and they'll just keep on.
Keep on keeping on till it
Yeah.
dies.
Yep.
Yep. Well, that's what my truck right now has 230,000 miles on it. I don't plan on selling Jesse anytime soon.
Right. Well, look at how we always tear down our schools, rebuild schools. They use the same buildings for hundreds of years, thousands of years.
I was gonna say hundreds of years. Like that's a conservative. Like
Right. Yeah.
we went to a town called Bardejov.
Mhm.
Okay, and this is where my grandfather's from. It's more towards like further north towards Poland. And Bardejov, this town center, is an old castle.
Yeah.
Like it's an old castle with just newer houses built around the
Mhm.
walls, but they didn't tear down the walls or level anything out. It's just all the
Oh,
castle.
yeah.
It's so history based rich.
Well, that's how the town that I lived in England, Shrewsbury.
Yeah, so why don't so before we really dive into this, so they have now everybody has the background of like my Slovak trip and where my family is from. Why don't you give the audience an outline of like your European experience?
Yeah, so I went to Italy with the Welsh choir last summer, but for a couple summers I lived in England in a 3-story row house with my whole family because my dad got transferred over there, and so it's just similar to what you were saying. Like the buildings are super old and everything. The one movie theater is in the town square in that town, and the building itself was built in 1492.
What a good year.
Isn't that crazy?
1492.
Yeah. So it used to be their old market building, and now they use it as a movie theater.
Huh.
That's like literally when Columbus sailed across the ocean. That building was built, and they're
Right.
still using it. They don't knock it down.
They don't knock it down. Yeah, and that's the one of the biggest differences that I see is just like it's not even a dedication to history, but it's like an appreciation for it. And I get kind of that the American mentality where it was like our entire mission was to rid ourselves of that. You know what I mean? Like independence
yourself.
independence from Britain and everything that happened during the revolution and stuff was just we wanted to get away. I mean, that's the entire purpose of America was to try to get away.
Yeah,
And create more freedoms. And
the Puritans
get out of persecution and everything else. It was, I mean, religious based. There's a bunch of things going on that where it was in the head of the founding fathers, right? But that's a totally different episode. If you want to get into that, listen to some hardcore history with Dan Carlin. But just, I mean, getting back to that car, right? Having the ability to use something until it's done, you know what I mean? And not, like you said, have that throwaway mentality, I think is an invaluable asset to entrepreneurs, to business people, to anybody that wants to build something from the ground up. First off, it saves you money, right?
Yeah.
And I think you kind of have to learn a little bit of adaptability. As that older that vehicle gets, I mean, I know things about my truck and the way that it ticks that I'm like, it doesn't say I need to change the oil, but it feels like I need to change the oil. You know what I mean? Like you start paying attention to that kind of stuff and you get to know that vehicle. It's like being in a long-term relationship. Yeah. You're like, you know, you're telling me you're not hungry, but your face says that you're hungry.
Yeah.
You're also yelling. So maybe we should get some food. Right? So you build in that ability to be long term.
Mm-hmm.
That's not just with cars. It's not just with whatever else. The throwaway mentality can be toxic because you start something, just toss it, move on to the next thing. You know, that can translate into relationships. It can translate into business ventures. If we decided to just try to, oh, this isn't working, we're going to try to start another business and then move on and kind of serial entrepreneur it, we wouldn't be sitting here right now, you and
Right.
I. Every time we had to pivot during the course of the Apex's journey over the last year, over the last 48 hours,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Like,
It's constantly changing.
it's constantly changing. So what do you like more about that concept, that not throwaway concept when you were living in England? Did you see similar things as far as like, you know,
yeah.
the Slovak side of things?
I would say that it almost places more of an emphasis on family because you're less material based.
Right.
So if you're constantly consumed of getting the next best thing or evolving in that regard, you're going to disregard the human contact because you're going to be so consumed with consuming.
Right. Yeah, like you're so caught up in the rat race kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It definitely leads to a simpler lifestyle, I think. And
Yeah,
and what I think is the biggest thing, and what I really wanted to get out of this, was how easy it is to be happy when you're happy with what you have, not with what you're going to get. You know what I mean? That's the biggest, that's the last point that I had written down here after kind of the ramble. You know what I mean? How happy your life can be when you make that mental switch to, I'm going to be happy with what I have now. You know, glad that I have a car, happy that I have a roof over my head, happy that I'm healthy enough at 81 years old to cut down corn with a scythe.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to be angry that I don't have the funds to get an automatic mower. I'm going to be happy that I have the health to be able to do it manually, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two different lenses. Two completely different lenses. We basically just kind of hit my next two. So, like, status isn't derived from what you drive or what you wear. I don't know what that's like in England because I've never been to the UK. But in Slovakia, like, the majority of people use public transport. So
yeah, I would say most Europeans use public transport because the trains are everywhere. I would say
trains, buses, pretty much everything, yeah.
They definitely utilize that type of stuff, but also...
What's up, Percy? Sorry, we're on Instagram Live. My boy Percy Eccles came on, hosts Taming Lightning. You guys need to check that out if you haven't. Taming Lightning on Instagram. This dude literally is traveling to Sweden to go to a plasma conference where they put plasma into glass. And it's like neon, but it's not neon. You have to listen to his show to figure out the difference because I'm not an expert on it by any means, but it's different. And it's beautiful. Some of these art pieces that people come up with are absolutely insane. And he's a huge advocate for it. So, it's awesome. Not a whole lot, buddy. Sorry, I didn't mean to totally upset.
Yeah.
Did you lose your thought?
Well, for the UK, they typically, depending on their job, they'll actually get, a stipend for a car. So everybody has, a Mercedes or a BMW just because their job pays for it, which is quite different than our culture. You would almost have to have just, a sales position here, and then you might get a company car, you might not. It seemed like a lot of people had really nice cars just because they were funded.
Yeah, and I was talking to my cousins, and this is something that I find. Oh, there we go. Come on. Okay. Absolutely insane. Is that he has, for the first 5 years that you work over there, you have 26 days or something like that vacation.
Oh, yeah.
And then you finish, it's a full month of vacation time. He was like, you only get 14?
Yeah.
He was like, what kind of screwy deal is that? I was like,
oh, yeah.
I don't know. But they're constantly paternity leave, the vacation time. Their work structure is so focused on the health of the individual to increase productivity It's insane. Like one of the girls that I'm friends with over there she does testing for iOS apps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And she gets to telework. She's only been working 8 months. Okay. So keep in mind what in the US it means to be working for 8 months somewhere. Okay. She's been working for 8 months, starts out with 20 days of vacation, and is able to telework up to twice a week on her choice. She doesn't have assigned hours. She has tasks that she has to get accomplished by the end of the week.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah. I was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
That type of culture is definitely in the UK too.
Really?
They have like holidays. It seems like every other day. It's like vacation for them is called holidays.
Right.
And I think it drove my dad crazy because he's always grinding, like the American grind. And he's like, what do you mean? You were just off 2 weeks ago. And I think that he drove them crazy too because he was constantly working.
Right.
I think that's the American way, to just constantly be grinding.
Mm-hmm. What do you think are the pluses and minuses of either one of those mentalities?
Well, if you look at American culture, I feel like that's how we've been able to be like number one in the world, is because we're constantly pushing for innovation and constantly, but I feel like it can be detrimental because you don't have enough time to breathe.
Right.
So people are,
or like the family sufferers and like other stuff. I mean,
but like divorce rates are,
we may be number one in certain areas, you know what I mean? But by like definitely not number one across the board, but just like, I think definitely from the capitalistic work ethic mentality, probably just as far as the widespread want to grind, definitely number one.
Widespread wealth too.
Right.
America's super wealthy.
Right. But like that, I mean, you see it as far as the sufferer of like the family structure.
Yeah, divorce rates are high.
Divorce rates are high. People don't, they invest their time in work when time is an investment that you have to invest in a bunch of areas, right? Not just one. You have to choose wisely where you invest that time. And I think that just my experience with Europe and the European cultures, they choose to invest that time in family.
Well, even in just contact with people, like when we were in Italy, when you were at dinner, you had dinner at like 9:00 at night, but you were not to be on your phone. You had to be present in the conversation. Mm-hmm. Everybody else is on their Instagram and Twitter. Like even when you're with your family here these days, you're like half present, half.
I know people that like they're like watching TV or watching a movie and they're on their phone rather than watching the movie.
Yeah.
Like, why even watch the movie?
Yeah,
and I'm definitely guilty of that at some point. You know what I mean? Like where I'm on Instagram, following, unfollowing, boosting accounts, doing social stuff or doing research, but the TV is just kind of background noise.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't understand why people dump so much money into TV ads, but that's a separate conversation. I think that that self-investment and investment in family and like conversation, the amount of people that are phenomenal at small talk in Europe is awesome. I mean, it's just like that. I think that art is kind of lost from mid-millennial to younger. Harder and harder for people to just have small talk conversations or network with people, which is why people are so taken aback and they think that you're an extroverted, charismatic personality when you just have conversations with other humans.
Well, the amount of people that like look so awkward if you're just walking by them on the sidewalk or whatever and you just smile at them.
Right.
They're like taken back.
Yeah, they don't know what to do.
Yeah. It's crazy.
All right, so one of the other points that I wanted to kind of get into is the appreciation for tradition and what that means. Tradition. Okay, Fiddler on the Roof. Oh my gosh. I wonder how many people will get that reference. If I were a rich man. I love that movie.
The Papa. Tradition.
Oh my. Oh, I want to watch that movie so bad now. We had the two tape VHS growing up. You'd have to pause right after the wedding and then restart it up, and it would keep going into Rev Tevye talking about how the Russians are kicking them out.
Yeah.
Anyway, tradition is definitely rich outside of just the buildings, right? Like I know in Slovakia, so it's still very, very respectful, and I mean it's just tradition that if like so I came over as my grandfather's grandson, right?
Mm-hmm.
He introduced me to a lot of the neighbors. The neighbors, it's still all double cheek kiss, right? Shake hands, double cheek kiss with both the men and the women. But it's just endearing. It's just like welcoming. You know what I mean? It's like getting yourself on an intimate level with other humans. And I think that that's kind of the switch, that the transition point.
Yeah.
And then the tradition is like the mother of the home brings out some food or like a shot of whatever kind of liquor they make in the house or some type of alcohol you toast to like your arrival, or just like telling your story. And people generally, like my grandfather has a garden, right, in a separate area of town. And there was his neighbor. We went and sat with his neighbor. His neighbor's wife brought out like a full meal, some of their homemade, we call it Shrewsbury, right, which is basically Slovak moonshine. Brings out that. We sit and talk to them for half an hour.
Really?
Yeah. You know, just like, because the husband was outside working in the garden. My grandfather waved, said, hey, my grandson's here. He said, come on over. We just sat outside talking for half an hour.
Yeah.
Like that, the traditions as far as being welcoming to other people and stuff like that, but then also Christmas, Easter, the Greek Catholic and Byzantine Rite church is very, very popular there. So they have these things called Odpusts, which is like major celebrations. Mm-hmm. So I was there for the celebration of the birth of Mary. And the whole town got together. And like there's like 400 people in this cathedral for mass, which they call cerkvi. And then everybody like met after mass and we all hung out for a little bit, and then people went back to their homes and had food and everything. But it's like the massive culture is focused on that religious tradition and everything like that. That's the majority.
What they've been doing for 2,000 years.
Right. And that's the majority of people. Whereas I feel like in the U.S. it's a minority of people. I mean, there's a majority. Like, it's just not as publicized. Like, the media is covering this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? In Slovakia. It's not as much of that. And I'm not just saying that there's less of a separation of church and state, or that I believe that there should be a separation of church and that there shouldn't be. You know what I mean? I don't want to get political on it.
This is just an observation.
Right. It's just an observation as far as, like, they've been doing that tradition for so long that that's just part of what they do.
Well, I know people that hate tradition. Like, a guy is always telling me, I just can't stand tradition. And
oh, hey, we'll finish your thought. Sorry.
And they're very against tradition. And I feel like the American way is, let's make it modern. Let's modernize everything. So I once heard a Catholic priest be asked, why doesn't the Catholic Church become more modernized? And he said, that's because we believe in tradition. And by you saying that you want it modernized, he said, let's put it this way. Modern isn't always better. Maybe in the scientific world, it's better because, you want the cleanest procedure for like heart procedures and everything. But for different cultural traditions, tradition is better because he's like, if you had a poem that was written 15 years ago, would you try to convince me that it's better than all the sonnets written by Shakespeare?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Some things are just classically
timeless
and good,
right? Because
of the tradition.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that point. Yeah, like that. Some things just, as much of a proponent as I am of the way that things have always been done isn't necessarily the way things need to be done in the future. I'm a massive proponent of that. Mm-hmm. I always think that you should challenge the way things are currently being done because there's probably a way to innovate. That's the American side of my head, right?
Right.
And then my grandparents is just like, there's something so pure about the tradition and the happiness that the tradition can bring that I think that we've gotten away from, that's caused this massive outbreak of depression and everything else here is just because we're not satisfied ever.
Well, I think tradition gives you a sense of belonging. Like,
which is what everybody kind of seeks and hopes for.
This is what my family did. This is what their family did. Just generations of people. And I feel like you almost like touch those people from the past whenever you redo something.
That's how I feel whenever I put on my uniform. I mean, I know that the Almacy has appeared on a bunch of different uniforms. I mean, and now I'm a part of that lineage, that tradition. And I think that the natural human tendency is to seek belonging, right? So, I mean, that's why social media is such an epidemic and why people are so focused on likes and people are so focused on comments and engagement and everything else is because of having a sense of belonging or a sense of acceptance, and tradition kind of gives you that.
Yeah.
Whether it's local at the family level, macro at the country level, whatever. We have those traditions. Like, we all feel a massive sense of belonging in the United States to the 4th of July, Independence Day. You know what I mean? To Memorial Day, to Veterans Day, to all of these different arenas. We got people giving a tour.
That's funny.
Nice.
That's very distracting to me. Oh, hello, people.
Squirrel. But all of those different things, I mean, that is a massive, you feel fireworks booming, at least me. You feel those fireworks booming in the air. You can feel the sonic waves in your chest. You're like, America.
Yeah. Calls back all the bombs throughout all the wars.
And Star Spangled Banner plays and everything like that. It's just a massive, that pull, that sense of tradition.
Yeah. Tradition definitely leads to pride.
Yeah. I think so too. And I think that people are really, really focused on trying to dilute it down.
Oh, yeah. Just strip it away.
Get rid of it. Yeah. It has no place kind of thing. I disagree.
It saddens me.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what the bigger picture kind of thing, though.
You just need to find a balance of being innovative, but always calling back to your roots.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So I think with that, we're just going to wrap up with tradition.
Tradition.
and kind of remind everybody that, just because you've had the same car for a bunch of years and you don't have as nice of a car as your neighbor doesn't necessarily mean that your status is any less or any more. Your worth is not derived from what you wear or how much you can afford, what type of title you have at your job. Your worth is in human equity, is what I like to call your friendships, your relationships, your family. Those things that are timeless. And that sometimes tradition can be the largest moral compass in allowing you to innovate because you have a foundation to fall back on.
It's embedded in your DNA.
Where whether you want to believe it or not,
right?
There's psychologically, there are habits and traditions that your body follows on a daily basis. So be aware of them. And maybe a little bit of a European mentality wouldn't hurt here in America.
Yeah. I don't think so.
So if you want to support the show, go ahead and reach out to www.patreon.com/The Apex Podcast. You can also follow us on Facebook at The Apex Podcast, on Instagram at The Apex Podcast, on Twitter at The Apex Podcast, and then me at Jan_Almacy on Instagram. Okay. Definitely give Percy a follow. It's Taming Lightning on Instagram. You can go to Taming Lightning on Apple Podcasts and find its base. It's a black symbol with a little yellow lightning bolt. Super, super interesting stuff over there.
Then maybe DM RJ and call him lazy for not being in this session.
Yeah. Jeez, RJ, slacker. At Doc Holiday 92. But with that, everybody, we will catch you on the next episode. Keep chasing that apex.